Hello, I'm Karen, an architect by profession. Today, I'm embracing a new role, that of a bride filled with anticipation. As I make my way down the aisle, every aspect of our wedding, from the vibrant blooms to the carefully curated playlist, reflects my detailed planning. I've always envisioned this day as a page lifted from a romance novel, a joyful celebration of our love. At the altar, I see Terry, my soon-to-be husband, an engineer whose pragmatic, down-to-earth approach complements my artistic spirit. Together, we felt like the ideal pair, each enhancing the other's strengths. As I draw closer, I notice a hint of concern in Terry's eyes, though I attribute it to typical pre-wedding nerves. Nearby, I overhear Terry's mother, Melissa, whispering with an intense, unsettling look. Despite her smiles and compliments, her eyes seem to tell a different story. The ceremony moves forward, but Terry's bows feel somewhat cold, and there's a noticeable hesitation before his "I do." During the ring exchange, Melissa makes a point of taking photos, her tone more cautious than celebratory. At the reception, Melissa delivers subtly critical compliments about my dress. She praises its beauty while gently critiquing its unconventional style, lightly noting that we're celebrating love in our unique way. I brush off Melissa's veiled criticisms about our wedding choices. But before things can escalate, Terry steps in, asking his mother for a private moment with me. His intervention feels more like a resignation than genuine support, adding a strange note to what should be a day of happiness. Looking around the room for reassurance, I hope to find comfort amid the wedding chaos. Yet I can't shake the feeling that something fundamental isn't right. The tension is palpable, and the warning signs are too prominent to ignore any longer. As Terry and I step onto the dance floor for our first dance, the physical space between us mirrors the emotional gulf. Although we move in sync, emotionally we are worlds apart. The song meant to symbolize our union now seems ironically cruel. As the last notes of the music die away, Terry's attempt at comfort only highlighted the deepening gap between us. "So, Mrs. Karen, ready for forever?" he asked, the irony of his question thick in the air. I wanted to share my uncertainties, to question if our future together would always be shadowed by today's discomfort. Instead, I hid my doubts behind a tentative smile, clinging to the hope that the dark clouds hanging over us would eventually clear, and that this rocky beginning wasn't a preview of our future. Little did I know, this day was just the prelude to a challenging period that would test not only the resilience of our marriage, but also the core of my identity. As we raised our glasses in a toast to our union, the celebratory words rang hollow, eclipsed by an unsettling sense of loss. The journey back to my home, a charming 3-bedroom house that symbolized my hard-won independence, marked the start of our shared life. This space was meant to be our sanctuary, the solid foundation for our future together. However, it quickly turned into the battleground for a series of conflicts that felt more like intrusions than the beginnings of marital harmony. Melissa, residing just a short distance away, began to drop by with alarming regularity, often uninvited. Her criticisms were relentless, targeting everything from my cooking to the decor of our home. Whether she was complaining about the taste of my dishes or the choice of bathroom tiles, her critiques were varied yet consistently harsh. Terry's efforts to mediate were weak at best, seeming more performative than genuinely protective. Melissa's intrusions became a regular ordeal. Each visit was another chance for her to assert dominance through thinly veiled insults and critiques. The turning point came one afternoon when Melissa arrived with suitcases in tow, her intentions clear and her sense of entitlement palpable. "This is no ordinary visit," she declared, breezing past me to place her luggage in my favorite cozy corner by the window, a haven for my quiet reflection and reading. "This spot will suit me just fine." Melissa announced, her tone leaving no room for argument. As I watched Melissa settle into our home, my heart sank. I caught Terry's eye, silently pleading for him to step in and protect the sanctity of the place we called ours. In a moment that called for unity, I pulled him aside, my voice shaking with emotion. "This is our home, Terry. Shouldn't we have talked about this together?" His look was distant, missing the warmth that had once comforted me. "Mom's getting older, Karen. It's not fair for her to be alone. She needs to be with family," he explained, emphasizing family in a way that made me feel more like an outsider than a partner. "So I'm not family, is that it?" The words stumbled out, heavy with hurt as tears began to form. Terry replied quickly, his patience thinning. "You know that's not what I mean, Karen, but I owe it to her." "What about what we owe to each other? Aren't we supposed to be building our life together, not adjusting it to include your mom as a permanent third?" I argued, feeling as though my words were just bouncing off him. My concerns, my feelings seemed to vanish into thin air. And just like that, the decision was made. Melissa's presence in our home was a done deal. With Melissa in the house, the atmosphere changed drastically. Every space that once held our shared dreams now carried the burden of tension and disagreement. My treasured reading nook was overrun with her belongings. The kitchen transformed into a constant battlefield of her critiques. Terry, the man I married, now seemed to be more in sync with Melissa than with me. It dawned on me that this battle was not just for my marriage or my personal space, but for my identity, my dignity, and my peace. How did we get here? How had my desires, my space, and my voice become secondary to Melissa's preferences? The transformation was dark. My beloved nook became a symbol of Melissa's encroachment, the kitchen a venue for her endless criticism, and my husband a stranger aligned with what felt like an adversary. This was only the beginning. Life, already filled with challenges, spiraled into a relentless nightmare as the oppressive atmosphere in our home mirrored the diminishing of my own space and voice. Amidst this mounting tension, a discovery brought everything into sharp focus. The unmistakable sight of 2 lines on a pregnancy test, signaling the start of a new life. In the chaos, discovering I was pregnant should have been a joyous revelation. However, the dense, tense air around me turned almost suffocating as I held the pregnancy test, my hands trembling with a mix of excitement and dread. This milestone, which I had always imagined would be one of the happiest moments of my life, now felt like an overwhelming burden. Alone in the bathroom, tears welled up as I confronted my reflection, the reality hitting me hard. The stakes were now much higher. When I finally shared the news with Terry, his reaction was underwhelming. "Well, that's something," he muttered, quickly shifting the conversation to some renovation idea his mother had proposed. Melissa didn't just see my pregnancy as big news. She saw it as her new project. She took it upon herself to manage every aspect of it, from my diet to the birthing plan, all under the guise of being helpful. Her interference soon became oppressive. She critiqued every bite I ate, casting judgmental glances at even the simplest meals and questioning my weight management. Despite my assurances that everything was doctor-approved, she scoffed. Doctors these days have no clue, dismissively convinced her old-school methods were superior to modern medical advice. As my pregnancy advanced, Melissa's control over my life grew even more intrusive. She expected me to maintain our home to her strict standards, regardless of my physical state. "Karen, why isn't the living room clean yet?" She would demand, comfortably ensconced in my reading nook, which she had taken over as her base for endless phone scrolling and TV watching. My pleas for rest were ignored, with Melissa dismissing pregnancy as no excuse for laziness. Terry's silence during these interactions only deepened the tension. His lack of support became painfully clear, especially during a dinner that escalated into a heated argument over baby names. Melissa sharply criticized my chosen name, and that was the final straw. "Enough, Melissa. This is my child, and I will decide how to name them," I asserted, my patience finally snapping. Her response was one of sheer indignation, as if my desire to control my own life was a direct affront to her. Terry's feeble attempts at mediation, often siding with his mother and dismissing me as overly emotional, only widened the rift between us. This growing divide underscored a stark reality. I was not only battling for my voice and space in my own home, but now, more critically, for the right to shape my future and that of my child. In all the chaos, the revelation that I was pregnant deepened the already suffocating atmosphere of our home. Holding the pregnancy test, my hands trembled with a mix of anticipation and dread. I had always imagined that discovering I was pregnant would be one of the most joyful moments in my life, filled with excitement and celebration. However, as I stood alone in the bathroom, facing my reflection with tears welling up, this milestone felt like a daunting burden instead. When I shared the news with Terry, his reaction was disappointingly subdued. "Well, that's something," he muttered, quickly changing the subject to a renovation idea his mother had proposed. It was clear that Melissa viewed my pregnancy not just as news, but as her new project. She took it upon herself to oversee everything from my diet to the birthing plan, all under the pretense of being helpful. Melissa's interference soon evolved into outright control. She monitored every bite I ate, casting judgmental glances at even the simplest meals and questioning my weight management, despite my assurances that my diet was doctor-approved. She scoffed, "Doctors these days have no clue," utterly convinced her dated knowledge was superior to contemporary medical advice. As my pregnancy progressed, Melissa's demands grew increasingly unreasonable. She expected me to maintain the house to her exacting standards, no matter my condition. "Karen, why isn't the living room clean yet?" she would demand, ensconced in my once peaceful reading nook, which she had commandeered for endless phone scrolling and TV watching. My pleas for rest were ignored. Melissa dismissed pregnancy as no excuse for laziness. Terry's silence during these interactions only intensified the tension. His lack of support became glaringly obvious, especially during a dinner that spiraled into an argument over baby names. Melissa's harsh critique of my chosen name was the last straw. "Enough, Melissa. This is my child, and I will decide how to name them," I declared, my patience completely eroded. Her reaction was one of sheer indignation, as if my desire to make decisions about my own life was a direct insult to her. Terry's feeble attempts at mediation, often siding with his mother and dismissing me as overly emotional, only deepened the rift between us. I felt more isolated than ever, trapped in a home that had transformed into a battleground. Where my voice seemed increasingly insignificant, it was no longer just about selecting a baby name. It was about reclaiming my autonomy, my dignity, and the sense of belonging that had been steadily undermined by Melissa's domineering presence. As I stared at the reflection of my once gleaming wedding ring, I scarcely recognized the woman looking back at me. A woman who was gradually losing everything she cherished. Her sanctuary, her self-respect, and most painfully, her resolve to stand up for herself. During one of our tense confrontations, Melissa, brimming with a vindictive sense of triumph, delivered a blow that changed everything. Melissa had insinuated that perhaps I didn't belong in their family if I couldn't handle a simple disagreement. The most excruciating part, though, was Terry's silence. His lack of response was deafening, reinforcing the notion that this struggle had been my harsh reality for much too long. Days melded into one another as I moved through a house that felt less and less like home, clinging to the sole beacon of hope I had left, the life growing inside me. Yet even this small comfort seemed under siege in the increasingly toxic environment. The tipping point came on a cold evening during yet another fraught family dinner. Despite my efforts to craft a flawless meal, Melissa's criticisms were relentless, attacking everything from the seasoning to the execution. Each of her harsh words felt like a physical blow, slowly chipping away at my already brittle confidence. But it was her next taunt, questioning my capability as a mother based on my so-called failure to manage household chores, that cut the deepest. Terry's quiet acceptance of her words was the final push I needed. Fueled by a potent mix of pent-up resentment and sheer desperation, I found my voice. I've been carrying our child, managing our home, and enduring endless criticism from your mother, and you're telling me to step it up. The shock on their faces was evident, but I was past caring. For too long, I had allowed myself to be diminished and demeaned. But in that moment, I reclaimed my voice. I'm done. I can't do this anymore. The clarity of my decision sliced through years of suppressed feelings like a beacon of light. It was a declaration of my refusal to endure any more disrespect or emotional torment. My voice quivered with emotion as I spoke, yet I remained resolute. I refused to raise my child in an environment where their mother is constantly undermined. If this is your idea of family, count me out, I declared, my words ringing with finality. As I rose from the dinner table, leaving their stunned silence behind, gathering only the essentials, I made my way to the door, my hands trembling as I reached for the handle, eager to escape the oppressive atmosphere. Melissa, this house is mine. I bought it. I decide who stays and who goes. Terry's voice broke through, laced with desperation. Karen, please, let's talk about this. But I was beyond negotiation. There's nothing left to discuss, I replied, my tears bearing witness to the agony of my decision. Stepping out into the cold night felt like the beginning of a new chapter in my life, one filled with uncertainty, but also tinged with a profound sense of liberation. The closing door behind me marked the end of a tumultuous saga, a final farewell to a life I could no longer endure. With each step, a mix of pain and determination coursed through me, fueled by the urgent need to reclaim my autonomy. The journey to my parents' home blurred with cold exhaustion and heartache. Just moments from the sanctuary of my childhood haven, a stumble sent me crashing to the ground. The physical pain was a mere echo of my inner turmoil, yet far from deterring me, this fall only strengthened my resolve. Arriving at my parents' doorstep, the concern on their faces mirrored the gravity of my situation. As they rushed me to the hospital, I realized that this moment of vulnerability marked not just an end, but also a new beginning. Lying in the hospital bed, coming to terms with my reality, I knew that returning to my former life was no longer an option. This breaking point was a crucial step towards reclaiming the life and dignity that had been stripped away from me. A painful yet necessary transition towards healing and independence. The clarity that comes with such pivotal moments was profound, illuminating the path forward from the shadows of my troubled past to a future I would shape myself. Amidst a whirlwind of emotions, I stood surrounded by the comforting yet anxious presence of my parents. Their silent worry spoke volumes about their fears concerning the true state of my marriage, now starkly revealed in its troubled depths. Breaking the heavy silence, my mother voiced her concern, her words laden with the weight of the unfolding reality. Karen, dear, what's your plan now? Unsure yet resolute, I replied, I'm not sure, Mom, but one thing's for sure. I can't go back to that life. Not now, not ever. My declaration, more assured than I expected, resonated with newfound determination. My father, who had been pacing anxiously, paused to offer reassurance, emphasizing their unwavering support regardless of my decision. He urged me to consider not just my future, but also the child growing inside me. His words prompted a silent acknowledgement from me. My mind had been a battleground of uncertain scenarios, each fraught with the possibility of a fresh start. The unexpected buzz of my phone shattered my reverie. A message from Terry, a plea for communication. Yet to me, his timing felt like a door long closed, his words unseen. Left hanging in the void as I powered off my phone, a symbolic end to our dialogue. My next steps became clear, marked by action rather than words. Consulting a family lawyer was my first decisive act toward untangling the turmoil of my marriage. With the unwavering support of my parents, we navigated the cold, legal breakdown of our union, discussing divorce, custody arrangements, and financial support. Despite the sterile nature of these discussions, they empowered me, marking the initial steps towards seizing control of my destiny and securing the well-being of my unborn child. Within a week, Terry and Melissa received the formal notices. Divorce papers for Terry and an eviction notice for Melissa from the home that was legally mine. Alongside these were demands for substantial child support and compensation for the emotional turmoil I had endured. Though drastic, these actions were imperative, severing the ties that had long bound me to a life of despair. When I eventually re-engaged with my phone, it was inundated with Terry's attempts to reconnect. His messages carried a blend of regret and a plea for reconciliation. Yet the wounds inflicted by nights of humiliation, years of neglect, and Melissa's calculated malice, all silently condoned by Terry, ran too deep. The fleeting temptation to entertain his overtures was swiftly overshadowed by the memory of enduring pain. This moment wasn't merely about closing a chapter. It was about reclaiming my narrative where the shadows of the past no longer dictated the brightness of my future. The love I once harbored for Terry had been utterly overshadowed by the grief of our disintegrating marriage. Taking decisive steps, I cleared away all remnants of him from my life. I deleted his messages, erased his contact details, and blocked him on all social media. To me, Terry had become a chapter of my past, a distressing period I was more than ready to close. I knew the path ahead would be fraught with challenges. Navigating a divorce with a child on the way was no simple journey. But I was determined to forge my path, stepping away from the stifling shadows that had once engulfed me toward a future brimming with hope. On the day of the court proceedings, the room was permeated with a sterile chill, characteristic of spaces where fates are decided. Seated beside me, my lawyer radiated confidence, while my parents provided silent yet steadfast support from behind. Across the aisle, Terry appeared lost, slowly coming to terms with the reality before him, while Melissa's expression fluctuated between shock and defiance. As the session commenced and the judge entered, prompting everyone to rise, a whirlwind of legal motions and arguments unfolded. It seemed as though Melissa and Terry were truly seeing the repercussions of their actions for the first time, not just through the legal ramifications, but through my eyes as well. When Melissa was called to testify, her usual bravado faded. She tried to justify her intrusions as concern for her son's well-being, but her arguments fell flat under the judge's skeptical scrutiny. The judge delivered a clear and firm verdict. I was granted a full divorce and sole custody of our unborn child. Terry was mandated to provide child support, and Melissa was hit with a substantial fine for emotional abuse and harassment, leaving her visibly shaken. As the judge's gavel fell, I felt a wave of liberation mixed with a tinge of melancholy. My marriage had not ended with loud confrontations, but rather with the quiet shuffling of papers and the firm, unwavering voice of justice. This chapter of my life was now firmly closed, paving the way for a fresh start free from the burdens of the past. The cost of my newfound freedom was something I could never have anticipated on the day I exchanged vows. Exiting the courtroom, Terry approached with a look of bewilderment, voicing his remorse and disbelief at how our lives had unraveled. Yet as I looked into his eyes, I no longer saw my future, but a profound void where love had once lived. I never envisioned this as our ending, Terry, but apologies can't undo what's been done, I stated firmly, turning away to leave the past behind. Melissa saw my gaze, perhaps in search of forgiveness or acknowledgement. However, I could not afford that closure. She had taken too much from me. Refusing to grant Melissa the satisfaction of seeing any further impact on my spirit, I stepped into the embrace of the outside world, which seemed to welcome me with open arms. The sun shone brighter, the colors appeared more vibrant. It felt as if I was seeing through a new lens, one not clouded by the shadows of past turmoil. My mother's embrace and her words of pride brought tears to my eyes. "You're truly free now, Karen," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I couldn't have faced this without you and Dad." I responded, my heart swelling with gratitude for their steadfast support. That evening, in the tranquility of what was now solely my home, I discovered a profound peace. Alone yet far from lonely, for the first time in what felt like forever, I was free to live on my terms. The path ahead as a single mother seemed daunting, yet as I felt my unborn child's gentle movements, a wave of confidence washed over me. We would navigate this journey together. I was certain of it. The trials I had endured had brought me to this juncture of self-discovery. Although they left scars, these scars told a story of resilience, not surrender. Gazing toward the horizon, I felt propelled not merely by circumstances, but by choice. This realization imbued me with a profound sense of empowerment, poised to embrace the future. I was motivated not out of obligation, but from a place of deliberate determination. I recognized this moment as the dawn of a significant new chapter in my life, ready to take on whatever lay ahead with a renewed spirit and unwavering resolve.